The house was still that night, yet somehow the words carried through the walls like ghosts. I was 14, standing in the hallway with a damp papier-mâché mask trembling in my hands, a black cat I'd been making for Halloween. The newspaper strips were still wet under my fingers, the flour paste clinging to my skin like desperate promises. In the dim light filtering from beneath the living room door, the cat's silver-lined eyes seemed to watch me with pity. I wasn't supposed to hear them, but their voices slid under the door like smoke. "You can take Hunter," my father's voice, steady and certain as oak. "I'll keep Poppy." My mother's response, equally resolved. Then a pause, and her voice again softer this time, tired, breaking. "And, Coraline, let the court decide." I remember staring at those silver-lined eyes of my mask, feeling the paste still wet and sticky between my fingers. The newspaper strips had begun to sag under their own weight, the face of my creation drooping into an expression of sorrow I hadn't intended. And just like that, I knew I didn't belong to anyone anymore. Our house in Salem wasn't large, but it had always felt like enough. It smelled of sawdust and antiseptic, my father's wood shop, and my mother's hospital shifts, somehow coexisting under the same roof. In the evenings, these scents would mingle with whatever was cooking for dinner, creating the particular aroma that, to me, meant home. Dad, Richard James, built furniture when work came his way. He had rough hands, always with tiny splinters embedded in the calluses that he never seemed to notice. He could transform raw lumber into tables and chairs that looked like they'd grown that way naturally. People said he had magic in his hands, but lately, those hands had been curled more often around beer bottles than chisels. Mom, Eliza, was an ER nurse, always exhausted, her scrubs perpetually smelling like bleach and stale coffee. She had a way of moving quickly without seeming rushed, except lately, when everything about her seemed hurried, especially how she moved through rooms my father occupied. My brother Hunter, 16, was the Golden Boy football team captain with loud, infectious laughter and the kind of smile that made adults forgive anything. His room was cluttered with trophies and dirty laundry in equal measure. He could charm anyone except, apparently, our fracturing family. My sister Poppy, only 9, was sweetness wrapped in ribbons and bedtime stories. She collected stuffed animals and named each one after a flower. Her room was pink and yellow, filled with drawings of our family holding hands under smiling suns. In her pictures, we were always standing close together. And me? I was somewhere in between. Quiet. The girl with glue on her fingers, cutting up old newspapers to make something that looked alive. Papier-mâché was my language when words felt too heavy or too light. It made silence feel less suffocating. I'd tear newspaper strips, mix flour and water, stir until smooth. The paste would cling to my palms like hope, messy but holding everything together. I loved watching plain paper transform into something strong enough to become a face, a mask, a momentary identity. That night, when I overheard them dividing their children like furniture after a garage sale, the paper face I held in my hands became something else as fragile as the girl who made it. I slipped back to my bedroom before they finished talking, closing the door so gently you wouldn't have heard it over their measured discussion of custody arrangements. Setting the mask on my desk to dry, I noticed a tear had fallen onto it, making a small crater in the still wet material. I didn't try to fix it. Some damage feels too honest to repair. That night, I slept with my window open, letting the October air slip in. Salem always felt different as Halloween approached, a charge in the atmosphere that visitors attributed to the town's haunted history, but locals knew was just anticipation for the season that defined us. I wondered if next Halloween I'd even be in Salem, if I'd be making masks at all. In the morning, my cat mask had dried with that teardrop divot still visible, right where its heart would be if cats wore their hearts on the outside instead of buried beneath fur and caution. A month later, the world stopped pretending we were a family. I sat in the Essex County Juvenile Court, legs shaking so badly my heels clicked against the polished wood of the chair. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the formal quiet of the courtroom. The air smelled like paper and coffee, not the warm kind, but burnt and bitter. Dad sat on one side of the courtroom, Mom on the other. The physical distance between them seemed to make tangible what had been growing for years. Hunter was beside Dad, chin lifted high like he was already grown, already a man who understood the world and his place in it. Poppy wasn't there. She was too young, they said. I wondered who was watching her. Probably Aunt Ashley, Mom's sister, who always smelled like cinnamon gum and looked at me like she was trying to figure out which parent I resembled more. The Department of Children and Families report was read aloud. I remember every word, even though I wish I didn't. The clinical language made our family sound like a failed experiment. Neither parent has presented a specific care plan for Coraline James, the social worker explained. The judge's voice had no edge, no sympathy, just procedure. I studied her face, wondering if she had children. If she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. Since both parents failed to present a plan, the court grants temporary custody of the minor, Coraline James, to the Department of Children and Families. I looked for someone to look back at me. Mom kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her nurse's shoes sensible and still against the carpet. Dad checked his phone, as if expecting a message more important than his daughter's fate. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, the words came out before I could stop them. I just want to be somewhere someone actually wants me. No one answered. The silence felt like confirmation. Miss Rodriguez, the DCF worker, waited with a clipboard and a kind face that didn't match the moment. She had dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that looked tired but gentle. She'd been assigned to my case just days before, yet somehow she was now the most constant adult in my life. We went back to what was no longer my home so I could pack. Mom handed me an old canvas tote bag, soft from years of washing. Its handles were fraying, like everything else. She didn't say a single word as I moved around what had been my bedroom for 14 years. Poppy wasn't even home. Mom had sent her to Aunt Ashley's, as if my departure might contaminate her, might make her wonder if she was next. I folded what little I wanted to bring: a couple of t-shirts, jeans, my sketchbook, and my black cat mask, still half finished. I left behind posters, books, everything too heavy for one bag or my heart. I looked at Miss Rodriguez with pleading eyes, my voice barely above a whisper. Can I please stay just one more night? Tomorrow's Halloween, and I want to see my little sister before I go. Please. Miss Rodriguez gave me a sympathetic look that told me everything before she spoke. Sweetheart, I know this is hard, she said, her voice soft but firm. But there are so many other kids waiting for a place to stay. Come on now. She rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. The sky began to drizzle as I followed Miss Rodriguez to her car. Salem, in late October rain, isn't the picturesque New England scene on postcards. It's gray and cold and unforgiving. The mask sat inside my small canvas bag, not fully covered, and at some point the rain had soaked half of it without me realizing. When Miss Rodriguez's car pulled away from the curb, I looked inside and saw the paper had melted, edges curling like burned leaves. The silver paint had bled across the cat's face. Half of it was gone. I pressed what remained against my chest and whispered words no one heard. Even the mask couldn't survive this. My first foster home was in Lynn, a small tan house that smelled of bleach and meatloaf. From the outside, it looked like it could belong to any average family lawn, neatly trimmed, American flag by the door, seasonal wreath announcing which holiday was next on the calendar. Inside, it was a different story. The Carters ran their home like a military camp disguised as a family. Mr. Carter had never served in the military, but he spoke about structure and discipline as if they were sacred texts. Mrs. Carter smiled too much and touched shoulders too often, her affection feeling rehearsed. Lights out at 9, even on weekends. No doors closed, ever. No crying after lights out. It upset the younger kids. There were 3 foster kids, including me, plus the Carters' own 2 children. Their biological kids had private rooms. The rest of us shared. I was placed with Lacey, a 10-year-old who cried quietly into her pillow every night after Mrs. Carter's room checks. She'd been there for 7 months already and had mastered the art of silent tears. I kept my ruined mask and sketchbook in the drawer under my bed. The mask was beyond repair, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. At night, when the house finally quieted, I'd take out my sketchbook and draw new mask shapes. Foxes, wolves, faces with calm eyes unlike any I knew in real life. I drew them in pencil first, then outlined in the black pen I'd managed to bring. I'd imagine the colors I would use if I had any, the materials I would layer if I could. On paper, I could still create worlds where faces transformed and identities shifted. One afternoon, their teenage son Brett found my sketchbook while I was in the bathroom. When I returned, he was flipping through the pages, his expression a mix of curiosity and contempt. "What are you? Some kind of freak? Gonna wear a different mask every day?" He laughed, holding the book just out of my reach. I yanked the notebook back, maybe a little too forcefully. My hand brushed against his, and he let out an exaggerated cry of pain, followed by a sly, taunting grin. By dinner, Mr. Carter had called DCF. The report said I had trouble adjusting and exhibited aggressive behavior toward the biological children. Miss Rodriguez didn't sound convinced when she called to tell me she'd be coming the next day, but it didn't matter. The decision was made. When Miss Rodriguez arrived with her clipboard and sympathetic eyes, I didn't pack much. My ruined mask, my sketchbook, a few clothes, 1 month, 2 homes. Before I left, Lacey grabbed my hand in the hallway, her small fingers cold against mine. "Don't go," she whispered, her eyes wide and damp. "When people leave, nobody ever comes back." I knelt beside her, feeling older than my 14 years. "I'll come back," I said. "Maybe not me, but my drawings will. I'll find a way to send them to you." It wasn't true, but it was something to hold on to. Something that made me feel like I existed beyond the moment, that I could leave a trace of myself that mattered. Miss Rodriguez waited patiently by the door, pretending not to hear our exchange. When I joined her, she squeezed my shoulder gently. "Sometimes the first placement isn't the right fit," she said as we got into her car. "We'll find somewhere better." I didn't answer. I was learning that silence was safer than hope. The second house had 6 beds, all filled. The building was large, a Victorian with peeling paint and drafty windows. It sat on a corner lot in Peabody, its grandeur long faded but still visible in the curved staircase and high ceilings. The Davenports smiled a lot when the social worker visited, but their smiles were thin and never reached their eyes. They took in 5 foster kids for the stipends, treating us like tenants more than family. I slept on the top bunk above Tricia, a 16-year-old who had been in the system since she was 7. She taught me the unwritten rules on my first night. Don't leave anything valuable out. Lock your backpack when you're at school. Allowance is $30 a month, but they'll cut it in half if you miss curfew, even by a minute. Don't ask for seconds at dinner. And don't get attached to anything or anyone. The Davenports were efficient, not cruel. We had clean clothes, regular meals, and a roof. What we didn't have was warmth, conversation, or the sense that we were anything more than obligations. I kept making masks in secret with whatever I could find: torn magazines from the recycling bin, cereal boxes, paste made from flour and water borrowed from the kitchen when no one was looking. I couldn't risk the mess that papier-mâché usually created, so I worked late at night, wiping up every drop of paste, collecting every scrap of paper. These masks were smaller, simpler than what I used to make, but they were mine, created in the narrow space between obligation and sleep. I tried calling Mom once, 3 weeks after I left. The call went to voicemail. Her recorded voice sounded happier than I remembered, instructing me to leave a message after the tone. I hung up without speaking. Dad said he'd call me back after this job site wrapped up. He never did. Only Poppy remembered me. One day, Miss Rodriguez brought a small Halloween card she'd sent through DCF. It was store-bought, with a little black cat drawn in crayon next to the printed message. Inside, in her careful 3rd-grade handwriting, "I miss you. Will you be home next Halloween? Love, Poppy." I spent 3 weeks saving part of my allowance to buy a cheap card at CVS. I drew a silver cat inside it and wrote, "I miss you too. Maybe next Halloween." It was a lie, but a soft one. The kind you tell because the truth would hurt too much. I had no idea where I'd be next, Halloween, or if I'd ever be home again. November slid into December, then January. Winter in Massachusetts is unforgiving, but at least it matched how I felt inside. Frozen, waiting for a thaw that seemed impossible. By February, I had started at my 3rd school in 4 months. Each time, I carried my schedule on a piece of paper, navigating hallways where everyone else seemed to know exactly where they belonged. I sat alone at lunch, drawing in my sketchbook, creating faces that always looked back at me. In March, the Davenports told Miss Rodriguez they couldn't continue to meet Coraline's needs. I hadn't caused trouble, I'd barely spoken, but sometimes silence is its own kind of demand. Or maybe it was because I never made any mistakes for them to take my allowance away. Miss Rodriguez appeared again, clipboard in hand, gentle eyes now familiar. I'm sorry, Coraline, she said. We're going to try somewhere else. 3 months, 3 homes. I was beginning to understand. Some people aren't meant to stick. After the Davenports filed a non-compliance report, DCF decided to transfer me to a youth shelter. Miss Rodriguez tried her best to comfort me. 3 months later, Miss Rodriguez showed up at the shelter with something I hadn't seen in her eyes before: hope. Coraline, she said, sitting with me on the front porch steps, away from the noise inside. We found a pre-adoptive home for you. She emphasized the words carefully. They live in Salem. They've been approved and are excited to meet you. Back to Salem. The word made something flutter in my chest, not quite hope but recognition. The place where I'd started. Who are they? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dr. Miguel Garcia is a pediatrician at North Shore Children's Hospital. His wife, Lucia, is an art teacher at Collins Middle School. They have a son, Julian, who's away at his first year of college. They've been thinking about adoption for a while. An art teacher. The words echoed in my mind, opening a door I thought had been sealed shut. The next day, Miss Rodriguez drove me to Salem. The trees were just beginning to turn, spots of red and gold appearing among the green. Salem in autumn has a particular magic that even grief couldn't fully dim. The Garcias lived in a blue colonial on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Their house wasn't large, but it had a wraparound porch with actual rocking chairs, like something from a movie about small-town America. Wind chimes hung from the eaves, creating a gentle melody in the breeze. The house smelled like cinnamon and turpentine, an unusual combination that somehow worked. The living room walls were covered in paintings, bold colors and movement, capturing landscapes, people, abstract emotions. They had a cat, too. A sleepy orange tabby named Mango, who regarded me with lazy interest from his perch on the windowsill. Dr. Garcia, who immediately asked me to call him Miguel, had kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses and a smile that formed slowly, as if he wanted to mean it. Mrs. Garcia, please, call me Lucia, had paint-stained fingernails and silver streaked through her dark hair. They both looked at me directly when they spoke, not through me or around me like so many adults did. That first night, Lucia brought hot chocolate to my room, not the instant kind, but thick and rich, made with real melted chocolate and cinnamon. She sat on the edge of the bed they'd prepared for me, decorated with a quilt in shades of blue and green. We're not trying to replace anyone, she said, her voice accented but clear. We just want you to feel safe here. And maybe, if you decide you want to stay, we could become a family together. But there's no rush, Coraline. No pressure. The words were so simple they hurt. Because after months of being shuffled from place to place, the idea that I might have a choice felt almost too large to comprehend. The next morning, Lucia showed me her art classroom in the basement. It was a large space with concrete floors painted in swirling patterns of blue and gold. Easels stood in one corner, a pottery wheel in another. Shelves lined the walls, filled with clay, brushes, bins of colored paper, and jars of paint. When she handed me a bowl of paste simple flour and water mixed to a smooth consistency, the smell hit me like memory. Miguel mentioned you make masks, she said. Is that still something you enjoy? I nodded, surprised he had remembered that detail from whatever file Miss Rodriguez had shared. Lucia smiled. Then this room is yours too, whenever you want it. That weekend, I made another cat mask paper mache again, the first time since that night in the hallway. I built it carefully, layer by layer, smoothing the edges with my fingers, feeling the familiar texture of wet paper becoming something solid. This time, I deliberately created a design that acknowledged damage. I rebuilt the torn one from my memory, but instead of hiding the fracture, I smoothed the ruined side with a layer of silver paint, not to hide the rip to honor it. A line of fracture turned beautiful. When it dried, I hung it on the wall of my new room. Looking at it, I realized it was the first thing I'd made in months that felt wholly mine. Not stolen time or borrowed materials, but something created without fear. That was the first time I thought maybe broken things could still be kept. The Garcias didn't push. They offered routine without rigidity, presence without pressure. Miguel came home for dinner almost every night, sharing stories about his young patients. Lucia talked about art and her students, asking about my day without demanding details I wasn't ready to share. They invited me to video calls with Julian, their son who was studying engineering at MIT. He showed me his dorm room, introduced his roommate, asked me questions about what I was reading or drawing. Never once did he suggest I was taking his place or invading his home. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to unfold. I spoke more at dinner. I spent hours in Lucia's studio basement, creating not just masks but sculptures, paintings, collages. I started doing homework at the kitchen table instead of hiding in my room. Miss Rodriguez visited regularly, her clipboard still present but less prominent. Each time, she asked if I was happy here. Each time, my answer became more certain. Yes, I finally told her, 4 months after arriving. I want to stay. The process wasn't simple. There were court dates, paperwork, evaluations. The system that had moved me around so easily now seemed determined to question the one place I wanted to remain. But the Garcias never wavered. They attended every hearing, completed every form, answered every question. They were willing to fight for me in a way no one had before. When I turned 15, a letter arrived in the mail. My name was written in familiar handwriting, sharp and controlled, just like my mother's nursing notes had always been. Miguel handed me the envelope at breakfast, his expression carefully neutral. You don't have to read it now. Or ever, if you don't want to. I took it to my room, where I sat cross-legged on the bed, the envelope heavy in my hands. Mango jumped up beside me, purring loudly as if offering moral support. Inside was a single sheet of paper, cream-colored stationery, with my mother's name embossed at the top. She'd remarried. David Connors, a hospital manager she'd met at work, with a 10-year-old son from his previous marriage. They were settling in as a family, in a new house in Marblehead. The letter was cordial, almost like a holiday update you'd send to distant relatives. She asked how I was doing in school, mentioned that Poppy was taking ballet lessons. There was no explanation for why she'd chosen one child over another, no acknowledgement of the months of silence, just neatly penned sentences creating the illusion of connection. At the bottom she'd written, "We'd love to hear from you when you're ready." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it under my pillow. That night, I lay awake, feeling it beneath my head, this thin paper connection to the woman who had once been the center of my world. The next morning, I asked Lucia if I could use her fancy stationery, the kind with watercolor flowers along the edges. I wrote back to my mother, my handwriting less controlled but my words equally measured. I told her about the Garcias, about my new school, about the masks I was making again. I asked if I could visit for Halloween. She wrote back 2 weeks later. We're still adjusting to our new family dynamic, sweetheart. Maybe next year would be better. A few weeks after that, Dad called. His voice sounded the same, that warm timbre that used to read me bedtime stories. He was getting married to Rebecca Moore, his high school sweetheart before he'd met my mother. She had twin daughters, 11 years old. He said that Hunter had been accepted into college. When I asked if I could visit for Halloween, he hesitated. I could hear his breath catch over the line. Rebecca thinks adding another teen might confuse her girls right now, he said finally. You understand, right, kiddo? I did. They had new families now, and I was just, something from before, a reminder of a failed attempt. That night, I cried for the first time since coming to the Garcias. Not the silent tears I'd mastered in foster care, but loud, gulping sobs that I couldn't contain. Lucia found me curled on my bed, clutching my pillow to my chest. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside me, her hand on my back, steady and warm. She stayed until the sobs subsided into hiccups, until my breathing steadied. Sometimes, she said finally, the people who should love us most aren't capable of it. Not because of anything we did or didn't do, but because of what's broken inside them. She touched my cheek gently. That doesn't mean you're unlovable, Coraline. It just means they couldn't see how wonderful you are. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not healing that would take much longer, but a recognition that the hole inside me wasn't my shape. It was theirs. By 16, I had lived with the Garcias for more than a year. The court had extended the pre-adoptive placement, with permanent adoption awaiting one final hearing. I had begun to think of their house as home, of my room as mine, of Miguel and Lucia as more than temporary guardians. October in Salem glowed again, jack-o'-lanterns flickering on porches, fake cobwebs stretching across bushes, laughter echoing down streets crowded with early tourists, seeking witchy thrills. I dressed as a silver witch that Halloween, with a mask I'd made myself papier-mâché, covered in silver leaf, transforming my face into something ethereal and otherworldly. The Garcias hosted a party for the neighborhood kids, and I spent the evening painting faces, transforming little ones into tigers and butterflies and zombies. Their giggles filled the air like music, their trust as they tilted their faces toward my brush, a gift I hadn't known I wanted. But I still avoided that corner, the one where my old house stood. I couldn't look at it. Some ghosts don't need faces, they just sit quietly in your chest, making themselves known in moments of unexpected silence. When I got home, exhausted but happy, Miguel and Lucia called me into the living room. They were sitting together on the sofa, holding hands. On the coffee table, an iPad screen glowed. Julian, calling from college, his face serious. Miguel cleared his throat, his usually steady voice trembling slightly. "Coraline, we wanted to tell you together, if you're willing." He glanced at Lucia, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd like to adopt you. Officially. To make you part of our family permanently." Julian smiled through the screen. "I'd love to have a sister like you, if you want that too." For a second, I couldn't breathe. No one had ever said they wanted me not like that. Not as a choice, rather than an obligation. I looked at their faces, these three people who had no reason to love me except that somehow, they did. Miguel with his kind eyes behind those wireframes, Lucia with paint perpetually under her fingernails, Julian with his easy acceptance. I cried, but it felt different this time, not the kind that burns, but the kind that cleanses. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "I want that too." That Halloween, I became Coraline Garcia. Well, not officially, the paperwork would take months, but in my heart, in that moment, I chose a family who had already chosen me. The adoption process took months, but it felt like time had finally learned to move in the right direction. There were meetings with lawyers, court appearances, mountains of paperwork. My birth parents were contacted for final consent. They signed a voluntary surrender without contesting. The court added 6 months of supervision before finalizing. When the judge asked me if I agreed to the adoption, I said yes. My voice didn't shake. My birth parents weren't there, of course. But Poppy sent a letter, decorated with a small cat doodle in the corner. "You'll always be the bravest sister I know. Love forever, Poppy." I kept it in my sketchbook, next to a photo of my new family, Miguel, Lucia, Julian, and me, standing in front of the courthouse on the day the judge approved the pre-adoption agreement. We were all smiling, but mine was the widest, my face open in a way it hadn't been in years. High school became a place I belonged, rather than just passed through. I joined the art club, made friends who came over to the house and seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. I started helping Lucia with her after-school art program for elementary students, teaching them how to make simple masks from paper plates and found objects. I applied to art schools with Lucia's encouragement, portfolio filled with masks and sculptures and paintings that told stories of transformation. When acceptance letters arrived from RISD, MassArt, and Parsons, the Garcias hosted a celebration dinner with a cake Lucia had decorated to look like an artist's palette. I chose MassArt, close enough to visit home regularly but far enough to feel like a new beginning. Julian, now in his final year at MIT, helped me move into my dorm, carrying boxes and assembling furniture with the easy companionship of a brother who had never questioned my place in his family. College opened worlds I hadn't imagined. I discovered I loved sculpture beyond masks, working with clay and metal and wood. I learned techniques from professors who pushed me to expand my vision, to see art as not just personal expression but conversation. But masks remained my first love, my signature. I experimented with materials, leather, fabric, wire mesh, found objects. Each creation was both hiding place and revelation, concealment and disclosure. In my junior year, a professor submitted my work to a student exhibition at a small gallery in Boston's South End. 3 of my masks were accepted, a series I called Transformations, each representing a stage of becoming. The night of the opening, the Garcias came, all three of them, dressed up, beaming with pride. They stood beside me as visitors examined my work, as strangers asked about my inspiration, my process, my vision. "Your daughter has extraordinary talent," someone told Lucia. She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Yes," she said. "She does." Your daughter. The word settled over me like a blessing. Boston smells different from Salem, busier, sharper, like concrete after rain and coffee and possibility. At 25, I run a small studio tucked between a bakery and a thrift shop in Jamaica Plain. The space isn't large, but the windows face east, filling it with morning light that makes even the messiest works in progress look magical. The sign above the door reads, "Paper Souls, Masks and Art by Coraline Garcia." I create commissioned pieces, masks for theater productions, installations for corporate lobbies. But every Saturday, I teach classes for children, showing them how to make masks from recycled paper and flour paste, just like I did at 14. Their hands get sticky, their laughter loud as they transform simple materials into faces that delight or frighten or intrigue. Sometimes, they talk about the families they'll go home to, and I listen, happy for them. Sometimes, one of them stays quiet, working alone while the others chatter. Those are the ones I help most gently, kneeling beside them, offering guidance without demand. We make faces together not to hide behind, but to show who we wish we could be, who we might become when we're ready. Every year, I send Poppy a new mask, different each time, one made of gold leaf, one painted with twilight blue, one woven from copper wire that catches the light like flame. Each is a promise that we are still connected, still sisters despite the years and miles and different last names. She's in college now, studying psychology at UMass Amherst. We meet for coffee when she's home on breaks, these visits growing less awkward with time. She tells me about our mother, who divorced David Connors after 3 years, about our father, who seems happy with Rebecca and her daughters, about Hunter, now working in finance in New York, married with a baby on the way. I listen, asking questions, genuinely interested in these people who share my blood, if not my daily life. Occasionally, I see flashes of longing in Poppy's eyes, wondering, perhaps, what it would have been like if our family had remained whole, if I had stayed. I don't share that longing. What broke gave me what I needed, even if the breaking hurt. This October, a package arrived from Poppy. She's 20 now, grown up, and a laugh that still sounds like the little sister I once tucked into bed. The box came with a note, "Open on Halloween night." I waited, just like she asked. That night, the Garcias came over for dinner. Lucia brought empanadas made from her grandmother's recipe. Miguel carved a pumpkin that looked suspiciously like our cat Mango. Julian, visiting from California where he now works as an engineer, brought wine and stories about his latest project. We ate, we laughed, we told the same old story about the night I spilled paste all over their carpet trying to create a papier-mâché phoenix that was too ambitious for my skills. The memory, once embarrassing, now felt like a treasured family legend. When they left, promising to return for brunch on Sunday, I opened Poppy's package. Inside was a silver papier-mâché cat mask, the edges uneven, the paint a little thick in places. It wasn't perfect, clearly the work of someone who hadn't made many masks before, but it was beautiful in its sincerity. There was a card tucked underneath. "This year I made my own silver cat mask. I was thinking of you." I hung it on my studio wall, right beside the one I'd made at 16, the one that had once been broken, then transformed by silver paint into something more honest. Standing before these two masks, one made by me, one made for me, I whispered words into the empty room. "You're always here with me." I believed it completely. Sometimes, customers ask about the name of my studio, Paper Souls. I tell them paper is fragile when it's a single sheet, but when layered carefully with the right adhesive, it becomes stronger than anyone expects. That's how people are too, I tell them. Layer by layer, we build ourselves into something that can withstand the world's rough handling. When my students peel their dried masks off the molds, the room fills with exclamations of surprise and delight, a chorus of voices, discovering that they've created something substantial from materials that seemed insufficient. It's a sound I once thought I'd lost forever, a reminder that joy can be found in the most unexpected transformations. Every Halloween, when the Garcias visit my studio, we hang our new creations side by side, mine, silver and steady, after years of practice. Lucia's, vibrant and bold with the confidence of a lifelong artist. Miguel's, meticulously detailed with the precision of a doctor's hands. Julian's, engineered with clever mechanisms that make the masks move or change with light. And now, Poppy's, tentative but sincere, joining our gallery of faces. Sometimes I wonder what my birth parents would think if they saw this wall of masks, this visual history of a family built rather than born. I doubt they would understand. Some people never learn to see beyond the cracks to the beauty that might emerge from them. I've learned that family isn't about who you start with, it's who stays to help you repair the mask when it breaks. It's who sees your cracks and scars and doesn't turn away, but instead shows you how to incorporate them into something more complex, more interesting, more true. At 30, I received an invitation to Hunter's daughter's first birthday party, my niece, a concept both strange and wonderful. I sent a small mask, appropriate for a child's room, crafted from soft felt and ribbon. A silver cat, of course. The tradition continues. I didn't attend the party. Some distances can't be bridged with a single gesture. But I included my phone number with the gift. An opening, if not yet a door. Hunter called a week later. His voice deeper than I remembered, but with that same confident cadence. "Coraline," he said. "She loves it. It's hanging above her crib." We talked for almost an hour. Awkward at first, then easier. He asked about my art, my studio. I asked about his daughter, his wife, his life in New York. Neither of us mentioned our parents. Some silences are agreements, not omissions. Before we hung up, he said, "I should have done more, back then. I was just a kid too, but I should have done something." "We all should have," I answered. "But we're doing something now." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. A new layer added to an old form. When I was 14, standing in that hallway with a damp papier-mâché mask in my hands, I couldn't have imagined the life I have now. I couldn't have known that being discarded would lead me to being chosen. That the fracture would create space for something stronger to grow. No one gets to decide your worth just because they walked away. Love isn't bound by blood. It's made by the people who stay, who see your cracks and choose to hold you anyway. If you were me, would you have forgiven them? Would you have gone back or stayed with the ones who chose you? Because for me, the answer is simple. I'm Coraline Garcia, and this is the mask I repaired. Not the paper one that crumbled in the rain all those years ago, but the one I wear on my face every day, the identity I've crafted from the pieces of myself that survived, layer by layer, tear by tear, choice by choice. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful. It's strong, and most importantly, it's mine. As I close my studio each night, turning off the lights that shine on dozens of masks created by my students and myself, I often think about that 14-year-old girl, standing in a hallway with a damp creation in her hands, overhearing the words that would change everything. I wish I could tell her that the breaking wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a different one. A story about how sometimes we have to lose the masks others made for us before we can create the ones that truly fit. And as I walk home through the autumn-scented streets, I carry this truth like a talisman. There is no wound so deep that art cannot reach it. No fracture so complete that love cannot bridge it. And no mask so broken that it cannot be transformed into something more beautiful than what came before. That is the inheritance I've claimed for myself. That is the legacy I'll pass on. That is the mask I repaired.